guys, welcome back to Legal Banter. A very happy Republic Day to all of you. The world often wonders about the efficacy of our Indian Constitution. Obviously, it is Republic Day and it was on this day in 1950 that the Constitution came into force. This single piece of document has been able to successfully run this country for almost 70 plus years. I'm sure some of you will raise your eyebrows about this use of successful, but let me tell you, it has been majorly successful. Today we're going to talk about the Indian Constitution not as a political gimmick or a toy in the hands of the political parties or judiciary, but today we're going to be discussing about the Constitution as an instrument, as an important instrument of social change. We're going to look through the Constitution through the lens of interpretation. We're going to try to understand that how over a period of time, based on external societal political factors, the interpretation of Constitution has changed. Sometimes this change has been good and it has led to enshrining of a lot of important fundamental rights. And at some unfortunate events, we've also seen the court bowing down to the political party's affiliation and not being able to uphold the ideals which were enshrined in the preamble of the Constitution. This video will be extremely important for students of constitutional law and Indian polity because we will be discussing a lot of cases herein. For ease of convenience and to be able to follow in an order, I have divided these cases into 3 stages, meaning thereby that we will be exploring the various facets of constitutional interpretation divided into 3 stages of development. Let's look at the first one. The first stage is the literal approach. It's also called as the grammatical stage, the categorical stage, or even the approach of textualism. As the names indicate, this was an era because we had just been independent. We had a new constitution to understand and apply, and therefore our judiciary was grappling to understand how best they could apply the constitution. Therefore, as a result, they chose the easiest way possible, which was to apply the law exactly the way it appeared. This is also called as a plain meaning rule, whereby they did not bother with looking at the intent or the purpose behind the law, not in any manner interested to find out the intention of the parliament when that law was drafted, merely focused on the literal meaning of the word or the phrases that were used. This stage is also marked by very less discretion that the judiciary could exercise. It was believed that because the law was already there, written in an unambiguous manner, the judiciary had nothing more to do except to locate the correct law and apply it in as objective manner as possible to the given facts of the case. This first stage is marked by a very typical approach that the Supreme Court followed. They weren't too adventurous and they wanted to be as close to the textual wording of the Constitution. They had their reasons to do so, and any time a question of constitutional importance came to them, they always wanted to believe that this was not within the domain of the judiciary to decide. The first case in this line is the famous case of A.K. Gopalan versus State of Madras. In this case, the court held that each of the fundamental rights, namely Article 19, 21 and 22, are not supposed to be read as a cohesive document. It is supposed to be considered as separate aspects of fundamental rights, and hence one cannot test the validity of a governmental action on the basis of each of these fundamental rights. This was the beginning of the era of textualism. The same approach was followed by the Supreme Court in cases of Shankari Prasad as well as Sajjan Singh. Now both these cases were cases pertaining to the constitutional validity of the abolition of zamindari laws. As a result of that, an important question of law came before the court. The court had to decide that could the fundamental rights be considered as something that could be amended by the parliament under the aegis of Article 368. The court in both these cases held that parliament did enjoy the power to amend the constitution as and when it wanted to do so. But it was not until the case of Keshwananda Bharti, which we will discuss in detail in stage 2, where the court actually had a change of heart. After Shankari Prasad and Sajjan Singh came the case of I.R. Coelho, where the court tried to take a 360-degree turn and held that no, Parliament does not enjoy any power to amend the Indian constitution. This ideology was based on a strict interpretation of Article 13, and the court believed that the word law included in Article 13 did not apply to an amendment. Same approach was followed by the court in cases of ADM Jabalpur versus Shivakant Shukla. Now this infamous case, known for all the wrong reasons, marked a big problem with the approach of Supreme Court. It was in this case that the landmark decision of the court where they held that during executive-led emergency, fundamental rights under Article 19, 20 and 21 will stand suspended. Justice H.R. Khanna gave his famous dissent that became the cause of the 44th Amendment, albeit it did cost him the Chief Justiceship of the Supreme Court. Followed by ADM Jabalpur, we had the case of Khadak Singh, which came in 1964. Now this case also marks the beginning of Supreme Court's venturing into understanding and considering whether right to privacy is indeed a fundamental right that can be included in Article 21. Again, the court only concentrated on the wordings of Article 21, which was life and personal liberty, and the court chose not to consider privacy an aspect of either of these. A cumulative understanding of the cases that I discussed will definitely give you a clear idea that the Supreme Court wasn't too adventurous and they wanted to remain as close to the textual wordings of the Constitution. They did not bother about the intent, but they were solely concerned about the text and the context in which that text was applicable, completely undermining the very reason some of the fundamental rights had been enacted. The second stage was the structural interpretation stage. This stage was marked by the entry of the famous basic structure doctrine, in which the court decided that Parliament did have the powers to amend the Constitution as provided in Article 368. However, one had to read certain limitations on that power. The reason why this conflict arose in the first place and had to be decided by the court through a 13 judges bench was that prior to Keshwananda Bharati, in the Golaknath case, a 11 judges bench had already ruled against the decisions in Sajjan Singh and Shankari Prasad. So if you look at the situation, there were two contrary opinions that were floating in the scenario. On one hand, we had Shankari Prasad and Sajjan Singh, where the court was very clearly of the opinion that Parliament could amend any part of the Constitution, including Part 3 of the Constitution. On the other hand, we had the Golaknath decision, where the court categorically rejected any claim or powers of the Parliament to amend fundamental rights as such. Therefore, it was obviously needed for a larger bench to be constituted, and there's an important constitutional question to be decided. The question whether Parliament can amend the Constitution, and specifically, can it amend fundamental rights itself? This question was finally resolved by the court in Keshwananda Bharati versus State of Kerala. This is a landmark judgment, and students of constitutional law will definitely be required to know this. In this case, the court resolved the conflict that had arose because of the two dissenting different judgments that were there. The court finally conceded to the ruling in Sajjan Singh and Shankari Prasad by stating that yes, Parliament could amend the Constitution. However, it also included an aspect of the Golaknath decision where it said that the same power is not unlimited and power to amend cannot be equated to power to destroy. It was in this light that the court devised the doctrine of basic structure. As a part of this, the court held that anything that formed a part of the basic structure was outside the purview of the Parliament to amend. They started putting more and more concepts into that basket, into that doctrine of basic structure, and over a period of time, there have been landmark notable decisions where the courts have progressively expanded the scope of this term. The Supreme Court was able to seal and finalize this basic structure doctrine, based on which it now decided that structure of the Constitution is what will be the main agenda while interpreting the provisions. The court continued this approach in the famous case of Menaka Gandhi versus Union of India, which was a case pertaining to the validity of the procedure established under law. Now, Article 21 did allow the government to withhold or take away the right of life or personal liberty of a person. But it could only do so provided there was a procedure established in law. Until Menka Gandhi, the courts had been very, very literal in understanding that what was the requirement under Article 21. It wasn't until this case that the court held and devised a triple tier test whereby to test the validity of any legal procedure, it had to qualify under Article 14, 19 and 21. So in this case also, it was a structure that the court was aiming to preserve. Moving on to the next case was the case of the first Minerva Mills case. In this case, the court had struck down the 24th Amendment to the Constitution because it believed that it had violated the basic structure of the Indian Constitution. It also stated that limited amending power was in itself an aspect of the basic structure doctrine. So, Minerva Mills, read along with Keshwananda Bharati, now seals the position that Parliament does not have unlimited power when it comes to amending the fundamental rights in the Constitution. The next case, again a landmark case, was the case of S.R. Bommai versus Union of India. In this case, the court had to determine the validity of the BJP ruled state government and the fact that president rule had to be enforced. The court did so because it was under the impression that once the demolition took place, it was a probability that riots or disorder like situation could erupt in the state. The court, however, chose the easy way out of considering secularism as a basic structure, and in order to preserve that, the court upheld the dismissal of the BJP government. Instead, what could have been better would have been the court to actually categorically state that they were imposing president rule because they were sure that the government, the state government, will not be able to regulate if situations of crimes or violence would erupt. Following from the S.R. Bommai case, we had the case of I.R. Coelho versus State of Tamil Nadu. Now, in this case, the court held that many fundamental rights are a part of the basic structure of the Constitution, and therefore, it had to interpret Article 31B, which had created the 9th schedule. Now, what does this 9th schedule do? Basically, any laws that went into the 9th schedule became immune from judicial review, which meant that if you were making a law into anything that was a part of 9th schedule, you were allowed to do so without it being scrutinized by the Supreme Court or the High Courts under Article 32 or 226. In simple words, basically to say, this meant that you could violate and take away citizens' fundamental rights if the law was founded in 9th schedule. So the court in I.R. Coelho held that one could not do so. This is not a blanket provision where you could shove all possible legislations that affected fundamental rights and try to claim the protection that the 9th schedule offered. As you can make out, this second stage was a good beginning. It was definitely an improvement from the first stage, but again, much needed to be done because again, the court in some cases chose to apply the basic structure doctrine very, very strictly, whereas in some cases the same doctrine was applied in a very convenient or it was given a lot of leverage for the court to be able to escape important political controversies. The court was yet not okay with the idea of moving outside its comfort zone and somewhere also justifying its action on the basis of this so-called separation of powers theory that we at least tend to follow in spirit. Unlike the US Constitution, where the separation of powers theory is an absolute part, an ingredient of their Constitution. We have now reached the final stage. This was the stage of pragmatism or the purposive interpretation stage. Obviously, it was called so because by then the Supreme Court had sort of burnt its hand multiple times to realize what would be the ideal approach to follow when it came to interpreting the fundamental rights and how far could they allow the Parliament to hold them. The court realized that the best approach would be to look at the purpose for which the law was made, not at what the law said, but what the law did, meaning thereby they had to now focus on the effect of the law to identify whether it was constitutionally valid or not. The court in this stage was able to decide and differentiate between social morality and constitutional morality to decide that validity of any legislation would not be on the basis or decided on the basis of social morality, but the standard will always be of that what the constitution has to say about its validity. In this case, the preamble, which was considered to be a progressive document even at the time when it was incorporated in our constitution, seemed to actually take a materializing shape, and through various landmark judgments, notably after 2015-2016, the court has been able to successfully interpret the constitutional provisions according to, or rather in the light of the purpose for which those provisions were made. There are various cases to demonstrate the change, and a good change rather, in the approach of the Supreme Court while interpreting fundamental rights that are enshrined in Part 3 of the Constitution. This discussion would be incomplete if I do not talk about the famous Puttaswamy judgment. This case, which is also known as the Aadhaar card case, was one of the cases that the India actually direly needed. It was only in this case that a 9 judges bench ruled with finality that right to privacy is in fact a fundamental right validly covered under Article 21. And it is through the enunciation of this right that various other rights, for example, the right to choose, the right of autonomy, the right of bodily privacy, the right of informational privacy, all of these were subsequently considered by the court to be included in the ambit of Article 21. This case was followed by yet another landmark case, which was the case of Navtej Singh Johar decision. This case is where the Supreme Court finally, overhauling the Suresh Kumar Kaushal decision, which was the appeal filed against the famous Nas Foundation case of the Delhi High Court, the court overruled Suresh Kumar Kaushal and stated that every person had complete autonomy and a right to choose their sexual partners. It recognized that the word sex under Article 15 not only included the physicality of a person's sex, but also the psychological aspect of a person's sexual orientation. The court held that a fundamental right as basic and as cohesive as Article 21 cannot be read in a watertight compartment, and because it uses words like life and personal liberty, these words would be capable of being interpreted at different points of time owing to the purpose for which they were being challenged. After the Navtej Singh Johar case came the case of Sabarimala. In this case also, the court held and decided that social morality and constitutional morality were two different things, and constitutional morality will always prevail over social morality. The court held that a person's right of religion cannot be allowed to overcome or overshadow a person's right to be treated equally. As we all know, this was the case where the right of menstruating women to enter the Sabarimala temple had been considered not allowed because of the age-old custom that was prevalent. The court believed that even if the temple and the temple authorities had every right to sanctify their religion, this could not in any manner be allowed to take away a parallel fundamental right of an individual. It was through this case that the court tried to strike a balance between two fundamental rights and how will one prevail over the other. Obviously, the balance is very delicate and there cannot be one-stop formula that applies in all possible cases where various fundamental rights are at loggerheads. But this case seems to mark a good beginning for that. The next case is the case of Central Public Information Officer, Supreme Court versus Subhash Chandra. This case also, amongst other things, held that the Supreme Court Chief Justice will now be considered a public entity under the Right to Information Act, and therefore a person's right to seek information, which again is a fundamental right, cannot be denied if the question or the information pertained to anything to do with the Chief Justice of India. And finally, the case of Anuradha Bhasin, another 2019 decision, landmark for all practical purposes, because it was in this case that the Supreme Court held that right to life and liberty along with Article 19 Clause 1 Subclause G which is freedom of practicing trade, business or profession, both of these read along will conclusively state that right to internet is included in right to life and personal liberty. The case was in the backdrop of a complete internet ban that was prevailing in the state of Jammu and Kashmir after the taking away of Article 370 and Article 35A of the Indian Constitution. The court held that when you take away such a thing and you impose an internet ban which is not only indiscriminate as well as it does not come with a timeline, it definitely violates a person's fundamental right. So as you can see, through all of these cases, and I'm sure there are many more, I will provide you a list in the description box as well, so be sure to check that out. Through all these cases, we too understand the Supreme Court is moving progressively. It's moving in the right direction. However, we do at certain times come across instances where the court seems to be struggling with wanting to move back to the second stage or even probably the first stage. It sort of sometimes loses sight of the fact that it has to move forward from the third stage that it has already achieved. We can see this in the context of the electoral bonds scam case already pending. We can also see in this the fact that the Aadhaar card review had been denied and struck down because the court did not realize that a reference petition with a larger bench was already pending, and also with the ongoing farmer bills protests that are going on, we don't seem to realize that the Supreme Court wants to continue moving on the track of Part 3. Whenever the legislature or the executive wields excessive and indiscriminate power, the judiciary always comes to the rescue of the common man. It's an absolutely true statement that when all hope is lost, a common man will always revert towards the court. It's obviously not a mere coincidence that the word justice and administration of justice is always associated with the court or the judiciary and never with the legislature or the executive. Therefore, as members of the legal fraternity, including teachers, students, and the people who form the law, it is our cumulative burden as well as a responsibility to ensure that we are able to empower our Supreme Court enough to make them daring enough that they can withstand the governmental pressure and do what they've always been designed to do, justice for people. I hope you liked this video and learned something new. If you like this, don't forget to hit the like button and share this with people who may find this useful. And also, don't forget to hit the notification bell as I post similar videos every weekend. Thank you so much for watching.